Welcome once again, everyone, for the final presentation from today's earlier breakout sessions. Thank you so much to all of our panel leads and those that attended the breakout sessions. There was a lot of really interesting debate, a lot of conversation around various topics from security and data standardization to documentation ownership and growth techniques and hacks. I heard a lot of really interesting stuff. Today we are going to be wrapping up our session with the Cliff Notes version from those. Our 5 panel leads will be presenting on their discoveries, their action items. There were several groups that walked away with even takeaways and goals that they want to apply to the future. We'll go ahead and get started here in our first slide. There we go. We got Bryn Heinbeck, CEO of TradeTech. He led the data standardization session. I will let him present on this topic.
Thanks, Chris. So, first thing we talked about was build on what we've got. The idea that we don't have a data standard, it's not perfect, but we do have the World Customs Organization protocol that covers 148 countries and 98% of all global trade. That is what U.S. Customs and other customs agencies demand that the trade correspond with them. And it's all the same. That's what my experience was as we connected to Japan and the U.S., we found it to be identical, or nearly identical. But it doesn't go far enough. So we can say, let's use this as a foundation. We don't need to go rediscover port codes. We've got them. And let's note that all of the carriers and VOCCs, customs house brokers, bonded facilities, and terminals all participate in these networks, and plural, not just here in the United States, but in Japan and Canada and elsewhere. You release cargo without customs permission, you got trouble. And there's something about the fact that customs is involved with this that goes beyond what we could do as a commercial standard. If we said commercially, I want you to put that data into the system before the vessel sails so that I can see the shipment coming, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But when the guy with the gun says it, you get compliance. And when they tell the carrier, you're not letting your whole ship in here if you've got something in here, it's a security process. We have compliance. That gives us a foundation upon which we can go. Next slide. So, in order to standardize, we need to talk about 2 things. One is the data itself, what we're doing, and the maps to do that. And so I think DCSA's already started that process, and we want to build on that. So there's people we can start collaborating with. It shouldn't just be one group or another. We need to be working together. We need to also start looking at a central repository that's publicly available for next to free or close to free. In particular, known entities, shippers, consignees. There needs to be one way that we all agree Walmart's name is spelled. Is it Wallstar Mart or is it Walmart? Can't be both because computer systems are literal and we're not going to get automation when we can't agree on this. So what we need is a central repository that we can bounce off of with APIs to say, does it already exist? If so, what is it? If it doesn't exist, let me double check, register, and that central place is actually going and saying, you missed it, it was over here, I'm not going to create that, but it needs to be duplicate free. We need a central place where there's only one way to identify somebody. Once we do that, we take a big step forward. Same thing with additional core reference data structures. The standard we have doesn't go far enough, but we need other pieces of information. We need to be able to have that in a place that's accessible for other people writing their software. And then we need to invite other systems participants that have other elements that can be contributed. One of the gentlemen with us has other expertise information, known parties, denied parties, parts information, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the tough, we continue to build this out in something that we can all tap into, we create more value. Next. The last thing, recommendations. There was a lot of energy, and I'm sure there was in everybody else's group, but what was really fun was people said, please don't wait till next year to start this meeting again. We need to be meeting on a monthly basis, an ongoing basis, and continuing this dialogue and developing this and a standard recommendation set. And we need momentum. And we need the JOC in this. The JOC's assistance. You started this, you need to come back and finish it. That's the ability to get the word out. They've already got a lot of data that's available. And so our call out to Eric, A, great idea. B, don't stop. Thanks.
Well said.
Thank you, Bryn. Thank you very much. For those of you that would like to follow up with Bryn afterwards, I highly encourage you to. There is a QR code on the site. If you're watching the recording of this, Bryn's contact information is on the site as well. Please reach out to him if you're interested in the data standardization and continuing the narrative. Next up, we have Miles Varghese. He will be presenting his growth models. He had a very comprehensive slide deck that he gave everyone, and there was lots of dialogue in that session as well. Miles.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks again for the opportunity. Thank you, and Aaron. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. I kept mine quite simple. Even though I had a lot of slides, I think our takeaways were really high level, more than anything else. Some of the challenges that some of the members were facing, we were all able to kind of jump in on. Some of the big findings, some of the common themes that we were able to uncover on our sticky notes, the right people in the right seats. Obviously everything, and it might sound cliche, but people do matter. And then when you hire them, right, don't just hire people that you know, but gauge for the competency and their expertise as well. Customer centricity is no longer an option, right? I think we all kind of speak in terms of the customer and the customer's language, but it's just like customer service. Everyone says that. So how do you go above and beyond that? It is really taking tactical ways to really understand and empathize, sympathize with them, whatever you want to call it, but understanding, again, with that expertise, and also sometimes you have to prove that. It's going to take some time in many cases where you can't just expect to be a startup and just jump into something and everyone say, okay, sounds like a good plan. This is not that type of industry at all. Be the pilot, control, especially at the earlier stages of your organization. You want to stay and remain in the driver's seat, which is easier said than done, especially with the bigger clients, your anchor customers that are going to be helping you and kind of helping you grow and scale. As awesome as that is, and as much as that's the outcome that you want, you also need to be very wary and control the outcomes and be able to work with them in a very transparent and open way, and also be able to have a deep enough relationship where you can also tell them, listen, we'll help you, but it can't just be on your terms, right? Especially if you're working with a bigger carrier or a bigger liner that's going to help you as a younger startup grow and scale. You need to be able to own that and control that conversation. And then when you control that conversation, the outcome becomes much more easier to manage. Growth itself comes in all shapes and sizes. There's not one model that fits everyone. It's ultimately dependent on a ton of factors. And one of the things that Kyle from Vision, brought in with his expertise as well, was that a lot of the times it is luck and market timing, right? People couldn't predict COVID. Some startups succeeded in COVID. Where your organization might not have been succeeded, a couple things change, the market factors, you get lucky, whatever it might be. A lot of that is still involved. And of course, right, you want to take advantage of that, but to the best of your ability, you want to try to find the right growth for you and for your organization. And when you are building something, it needs to align, again, with that outcomes that you have to control. And then last but not least, product distribution also matters, right? Looking at your sales stack, your tech stack, how you're going to integrate different solutions, going deep, not being afraid to spend a little bit of money on sales ops, right? Sales engineering, DevOps, right? If you have the ability to do so. And then you also want to think in terms of the client and their commercial experience. And when I say commercial experience, their buyer behavior, right? Most customers don't want to deal with long sales cycles. They don't want to sign NDAs, right? Understand it's a necessity, but that's just more hoops that you're making them jump through that doesn't actually solve their problem at all, So at the end of the day, your approach with them matters, and as long as you can kind of think in their terms and what matters to them, let them try it. Perhaps it might work with your model. Maybe it's a sales model. You really have to adapt it, right, and align it with what you're trying to build from a startup or a tech perspective, or even if you're an established company or an entrepreneur and you're trying to gain traction. You have to think about product distribution, and I think the one thing that I am missing is the change management aspect as well, where sometimes you're going to find yourself in very difficult situations where you need to, maybe it's an enterprise sale where you need to convert and talk to every single stakeholder, make them feel comfortable, make them feel heard, and be able to, in a very framework and a tactical way, be able to approach that win buy-in and think about it from that perspective, because the hardest part often is just getting people to trust you at the end of the day. But that's the outcomes of my workshop. Thank you guys again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Miles. Great job, man. Next up, we have Edmund Tu. He did a really interesting session on document and data ownership. There's a lot of overlap as well with the first presentation from Bryn on data standardization. I will hand off the microphone to Edmund Tu.
Thank you, Chris. Just want to say, thank you, Chris, for being our chair and for the invitation from Eric at the Journal of Commerce for having me. So in our sections of document and data ownership in global trade, there are a lot of documents, bill of ladings, delivery orders, etc. And in our discussion, we focus on the two parts here. So the first, what is the current situation of the industry? What are some of the pain points? One key one that we see is currently in regards of data ownership, often the definitions is a little bit murky. It's very hard for the data consumer to prove each data owner. Second, I think it is a pretty new topic as well. So when it comes to driving adoptions, many of the incentive mechanism between all these parties is yet to be fully figured out. And lastly, when it comes to source of truth, currently as we see in the supply chain, there are often multiple sources. In the last two sections, we come up with certain suggestions for us to move forward. So first, we believe those standards should be driven by not-for-profit organizations. Data should be paid for use only. And lastly, pretty important on the data ownership subject, we believe there should be some sort of framework for the industry, and this will be a very good directions to go forward. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edmund. Very nice. Next up, Eric Green. He focused on the startup to growth stage overall theme. I actually love your slides, Eric, to the point. Please, I look forward to your summary.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Aaron, and thank you for attending. It's been great conversations. Chain.io is an integration platform. We are a Series A company maturing into our Series B, and I was fortunate to join about 6 months ago. Brian Glick, our CEO, who's trapped on a train somewhere in Northern California, so I was able to stand in for him. So thank you very much for having me. The overall theme from a startup to a growth stage company in some broad brushstrokes is when you start up, as most of you know, you're solving a problem for a client. And that client wants, is demanding, etc. But that growth stage, pardon me, is really predictably solving that problem over and over and scaling, which I think comes with some unique challenges and some unique cultural changes in an organization. And so that predictability really centered in our conversations around the product, around people, and around the process. Aaron? So from the product standpoint, this came out from our vision partners, really finding that common denominator problem that you can build a product on. As most of us know, if you build that product for one customer, you're making adjustments, et cetera, making customizations. And again, later, this bullet here, where every startup CEO and founder always says yes to that first customer, and you keep customizing, but there's that point of inflection where you first say no. And that's like a cultural change and a cultural mentality that we were talking about in our session. Minimizing tech debt early, I think, plays right into that, right? Where you're building for that one, where you really should be thinking about building for the many. And again, it's a tough mind shift to get. We talked about agility and data integrity in your product. And then product marketing. There was a discussion with a gentleman that's got a joint venture in the Far East where they're trying to sell app-based application into warehouse and traditional logistics companies, and they're really struggling to find that product fit and product market fit. So there was some discussion around really trying to map out what the problem is back to the common denominator to get the product going. Please, Aaron. On the people and process side, our friends here from Israel, they built a great product that's scaling in Israel. Now they're moving into Turkey, and we started discussions around how do you go into that next market? Or the product may scale into the next market, but just the culture and the people and the things that have to go into it may be different. So finding that expert and an expertise around a new market is something that we recommend. A lot of discussion, and probably don't need to tell anyone here, but the capital markets have shifted, right? Where there's a much more focus on a path to profitability and capital efficiency. So we talked a lot about that and getting the right people aligned there. The change management, this came out of Miles' session 2, which is, when you're selling this product and you're building processes, whether it be in customer success, internally or externally, really thinking about that change management piece as a path to success. And then building internal processes and incentives to motivate internal teams. The group that's from Wayfair, they've incented their customer service people in a previous venture by data integrity and data cleanliness, which I thought was a really unique way to incent people, which is exactly what you want, but a structure that was interesting. All right, next. I've put a bunch of resources here on some things we've talked about. A lot of this focuses on the capital raise and the venture side and some of the SaaS metrics, etc. The 8 steps for leading change was a change management discussion that came out with Miles. And then I have some slides in the back about kind of the day in the life of a VC and raising money based on your stages, just for some information sake. So, appreciate the opportunity, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you. All of these links that are up here are once again available on the site. We'll have a QR code, and for those of you watching the recording, it will be available so you can click on the links and look more in detail into them. Thank you very much, Eric. Last but not least, John, your session was extremely informative, at least for me personally, especially in the beginning session. Talked a lot about security aspects of the supply chain. John Tulleri.
Well, thank you, everybody. This was a good day. I had some really good conversations. One of the big things that came out today was cybersecurity should be raised to the main stage. It's involved and engaged in everything that we all do. It wasn't there, which I think would have led more people here. We should think about the session or sessions in different areas that would make sense. Best practices, as we're all going through our security challenges at different levels, that should be made available. FailFest, I've done this many times before. That's one thing that'd be really interesting to bring here would be a FailFest where people have different aspects of what a fail, what did they learn, lessons learned, collaboration, so we all can learn from that. It doesn't have to be cybersecurity, it could be more broad, but I've seen CEOs get up and everybody say, I lost $20 million of revenue because of this happened. It's powerful. That'd be great for drinks one night. Think about that. That would be, just don't tell what you heard. I was asked today how someone could market the value of their organization's investment. They said some of their competitors had no security. And how could they demonstrate the power of what they had built and that investment to secure their customer and that data versus some of the others? And that's a tough one. It requires more conversation. But that was pretty interesting. How to secure the APIs? Everybody's going API, but what are we doing in and around API security? I think that's also a powerful session that we should do in the future. Next slide, please. I provided some informational links. There's more. If somebody has a particular interest, just send me a note, and I may have a link that may be helpful. We actually focus on cybersecurity for the trucking industry, and we have our own conference as well, so there's some things that may be of interest. Next slide, please. Some quick product links on the enterprise side. There's competitors. This may be a good thing if you said, if I go look at Okta and who competes against Okta, multi-factor, single sign-on. So if you were looking at just some of those areas, I put some basic ones here. Next slide, please. And some of the best practices. I'm in the process of building a couple new products. And so we're trying to do security up front, security by design, security with partners. Don't do this alone. Bring the whole village in and think about how you're going to build out and tie it all down. And we've been focused on API security, how we're going to share data with our members, the segregation of duties, patches. We see with some of the vendors giving bad patches or they were hacked and they didn't know it, right? So how you manage all that so you don't end up on the front page of the news. And that's my goal in the next couple of months when we do our releases. Penetration testing, even if you think you're not ready, you go do it, you find out those holes, and you always switch vendors. Don't stick with friends and family, don't stick with the same one. You always mix it up because they get too comfortable and you want somebody to find a thing that somebody else hasn't found before. It's worked for me very well. And then always continue to refine your security architecture, learn from the others, the best practices, and ask everybody, not the same vendor, the same partner every time. Try to go out and someone's going to help you elsewhere that you wouldn't have thought, but even here, it's been rewarding. That's it, thank you.
One closing minute here for everyone. Thank you, everyone that participated, especially our 5 panelists, Aaron Tarnowski, for supporting us here today. We started off this session about 4 hours ago in the true spirit of what DevCons are. Started with just a topic, 5 topics. I don't know if you guys recognize here what has actually transpired, but there's amazing action items in a period of just 4 hours. We went from idea to reality to a concept. This presentation was put together in an hour, and it is really an amazing accomplishment. I've attended many different kinds of developer conferences. This has been by far one of the more rewarding ones for me, because they tend to be more programmatically done, or more typing and programming and developing. There have been so many amazing ideas here that have been formed today. I thank each of you for attending. The session can be picked up on this website. It may redirect later, but this gives us the ability to update. You'll be able to access all those links. And thank you again for attending, and we hope to see you next year.